Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Fulfilling her sister's Christmas wish. Chapter 1. Ezra Tobias sat in the chair, gazing, stunned, at the will in his hand. He glanced up at the plump, balding attorney behind the desk, who stared back at him, implacable. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "Your brother's will is quite straightforward, Mr. Tobias," Mr. Andrews told him in a slightly condescending tone. "You are now the legal guardian of the children, Daisy Tobias, aged 10, and Thomas Tobias, age 8. The will also states that you will inherit your brother's ranch upon your marriage to one Ruby Berkley." Ezra ran his hands through his thick red-brown hair. "And who is this Ruby Berkley?" Mr. Andrews consulted a paper. "She is Delta Tobias's sister. Your sister-in-law's sister. Why must I marry her in order to inherit the ranch?" "The will does not make explanations, Mr. Tobias. It only sets out the conditions of your brother's intentions. And the time limit. They weren't specific about the date, only about the amount of time should they succumb before the children were grown. Using that as a guide, you are to marry by Christmas." Gazing down, Ezra restlessly shifted his hat in his fingers. "And if I don't marry this particular woman?" he asked after a long moment. "Then the ranch reverts to the town of Taos," Mr. Andrews stated, "and the children become wards of the state." "Stephen could not have meant this," Ezra snapped, appalled and flustered. He stood up to pace the small office. "To send his children into an orphanage if I don't marry this woman? I cannot know your brother's mind, sir." Mr. Andrews didn't appear to care either. Annoyed by the man's attitude, Ezra stopped pacing. "Is there anything else?" Once again, Mr. Andrews consulted his notes. "As your brother and sister-in-law perished in Oregon, their bodies were buried there. If you wish to bring them home for burial here, you must travel there yourself and fetch them." "All right." Placing his hat back on his head, Ezra departed the lawyer's office, and squinted into the bright sunlight. As usual, he gazed up at the mountains not so very far away, then untied his horse from the rail. Mounting up, he rode down the dusty main street toward the saloon, tipping his hat respectfully to the townsfolk he passed. The saloon churned out laughter and piano music through its bat-wing doors, and he strode inside. While not exactly a drinker, Ezra did enjoy sitting at a table with a tankard of beer and a game of cards if one was to be had. Acquaintances waved him over to a game, but on this day, he declined and took a stool at the bar. Charlie's, the bartender and owner of the saloon, ambled over. "Not gonna play a game today, Ezra?" "No," Ezra shook his head. "Too much on my mind. I'd not be able to concentrate." "Beer, then?" "Yeah, thanks, Charlie." Charlie returned with a foaming mug, and Ezra set a coin on the bar to pay for it. "I heard about your brother, Ezra. My condolences." "A fever," Ezra answered, the grief of his brother's death still too fresh for Ezra to want to talk much about it. "His wife, too. It's a hard thing to lose both of them," Charlie said, leaning his hip against the bar and crossing his arms. "What'll happen to the kids? I'll be their new father if I marry some strange woman. If I don't, it's to the orphanage with them." Unwilling to go into his brother's will and the ridiculous demands within it, Ezra merely replied, "Not sure yet." "Makes sense that you raise them," Charlie told him. "You'd make a great pa to them. I know they cotton to you." "Would I?" Ezra took a long gulp from his beer. "Stephen always considered me wild, reckless, and unreliable. That don't make it true, now, does it?" Ezra stared at the mahogany top of the bar and didn't answer. "The way I see it," Charlie continued into the silence, "Stephen relied on you heavily once your pa retired from ranching. And you delivered, eh? Haven't you helped him turn that place into one of the most successful ranches in the area? He couldn't have done that without you." Thanks for the encouragement, Charlie. I mean it. Sure, you were a little on the rebellious side when you was younger. Would rather race horses than chase cows. Dance with the ladies and get drunk. You've grown up some in the last few years. I know, I've watched you. You got my respect, I'll tell you. Ezra swallowed another drink and found a smile. You're a good man, Charlie. I had no idea you kept tabs on me, though. Not so much tabs, Charlie replied with a grin. I ain't the only one in town who notices things. Still, Stephen didn't trust me to do right by him. Neither did my pa, I reckon. But you will, Ezra, that's the thing. You will. Charlie left to wait upon the card players and bring them fresh drinks while Ezra moodily finished his beer. When Charlie pointed at his tankard and raised his brow in question, Ezra shook his head. I ought to be getting back. Tell your ma and pa I say hello. Ezra tipped his hat. I will, Charlie. Riding the 3 miles to the ranch his elderly father had given to his older brother, Ezra contemplated Stephen's will. Marry some woman I ain't never met? Why in the blazes would he demand that of me? He had no answers for that. The more he thought about it, the less sense it made. True, their father, Fred, and Stephen both thought him rebellious and unstable. Since Fred stepped down, unable to keep up with the work alone, Ezra had stepped up and worked alongside Stephen to make the ranch prosper. Now that it did prosper, Stephen had died and refused to simply leave it to his closest relation without added conditions. Perhaps it was his grief that inspired it, but the more Ezra thought about it, the angrier he became. This is not right, Stephen, he growled, cantering his horse along the road. You'd see your kids into an orphanage rather than trust me to do right by them? How dare you? You don't think highly enough of me to care for the ranch? Maybe if you weren't so blind, you might have seen the changes in me, and how I did right by you. Reaching the ranch yard with its 2 houses, the big barn, the corrals with a few stock horses searching for bits of feed they may have missed inside it, Ezra dismounted and tied his gelding to the rail. He unsaddled the horse and put his saddle and bridle in the tack room, wondering how to broach the subject of Stephen's will to his folks. They had been devastated by the loss of their son and his wife and continued to openly grieve. Like I didn't love him, too, Ezra grumbled to himself as he turned the gelding loose in the corral. Since word arrived by telegraph that Stephen and Delta had died of a fever while traveling in Oregon, Ezra had moved from his parents' house into that of his brother in order to care for Daisy and Tom. Both his parents were getting too old to raise another set of children, and Thelma, his mother, had grown frail in recent years. Striding into the house he had started to consider his own, Ezra discovered Fred and Thelma in the kitchen drinking coffee. Of course, his first thought was whether or not they knew the contents of Stephen's will. Hello, he said, his voice neutral. Fred gave him a brief nod. Hello, son. Ezra poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter to take a sip from it. Where are the kids? In their rooms, Thelma replied, her thin frame withered and bent, her shoulders rounded. Daisy had a crying fit, and that set Tom off. Neither are taking the deaths well, Fred added. None of us are, Pa. Ezra caught his mother's eyes. Immediately, he realized that she knew what Stephen had written into the will. I reckon you are aware of Stephen's lack of trust in me, he said. Fred scowled. Now, wait a minute. No, Ezra snapped. He'd rather see the ranch leave the family, and the children stuck into an orphanage than put me in charge of both. If that's not a lack of trust, then I don't know what is. Son, Thelma began, but Ezra waved his hand at her. No. I don't need to hear it from you as well. It's quite obvious how my family looks at me. Storming from the kitchen, Ezra slammed his way out of the house. Chapter 2. Ruby Berkley read, then reread, the letter from her sister. Stunned, she could not seem to grasp the message in it. What in the world, she murmured. My dearest Ruby. If you are reading this, then you also know that Stephen and I have passed from this world. I am leaving this missive in the custody of my mother-in-law, Mrs. Thelma Tobias. She will mail it to you in the hapless event of mine and Stephen's deaths. It is my dying wish, dear sister, that you come west to New Mexico Territory and marry my husband's brother, Ezra. I know this may seem shocking to you, but I want you to become the mother of my 2 children, Daisy and Thomas. By marrying Ezra, you both will become their guardians and parents. I can think of no better fate for them than to be raised by you. Ezra is a good, hard-working man, and will be a most excellent husband to you. He needs a good woman to stand beside him, and you fit that requirement exactly, Ruby. By you marrying Ezra, my children will be raised by blood relations and not strangers. I have found happiness in the West, and I truly feel you will as well. Please abide by my wishes and come to Taos. Marry Ezra. Be the mother my children need. Your loving sister, Delta. Ruby folded the letter, tears rolling down her cheeks. Oh, Delta, she wept. You were far too young to die. And what you ask of me, how could you ask that? I cannot marry a stranger. Resting her face on her folded arms, Ruby cried. She and her parents had wept on and off in the weeks since the telegram came to inform them of Delta's passing in Oregon. Regret stung her sharply. Ruby had intended to take a trip west to visit her sister and meet her young niece and nephew. Now Delta was gone, and Ruby would never see her again. Apparently hearing her sobbing, Ruby's mother, Henrietta, walked into the kitchen, for Ruby heard her steps on the tile behind her. Ruby? Yes, Mother. Ruby choked back her tears, wiping her face and eyes with a napkin. I have a letter from Delta. From Delta? How is this possible? Henrietta took a chair at the table opposite Ruby, her eyes, already filling with tears, confused. Without answering, Ruby passed her the paper. Henrietta read it, and, even as Ruby had, read it again, incredulous. This is impossible. It would appear Delta had a premonition or something, Ruby said wearily. And the wherewithal to act upon either foresight or her instincts. Either way, she wishes me to become Daisy and Tom's mother. But to go to this, Taos? Henrietta gazed at her blankly. You cannot just go there and marry this man, Ruby. I already lost one daughter to the Wild West. I cannot lose another. Nor do I have any desire to marry a cowboy, Ruby replied, her tone dry. Perhaps I should go to New Mexico Territory in order to bring the children back here to Boston. I have no need to marry the gentleman to become the children's mother. Henrietta nodded, carefully wiping her eyes. We have more than enough room for them here, she said. I would certainly enjoy having them, as you seem determined to remain a spinster all your life. With an effort, Ruby kept herself from rolling her eyes. I am hardly a spinster, Mother, she replied stiffly. I am 23 years old. You use that argument to see me married to an idiotic man who is hardly worth my notice. Henrietta frowned heavily. These men who are hardly worth your notice come from wealthy and connected families. Yet, you look down your nose at them. Why, I am becoming ashamed to hold my head up around town. Stop it, Mother, Ruby told her sharply. Delta is gone from us, and here you sit, complaining about my lack of a husband. I am going to New Mexico to bring Delta's children home. Rising, Ruby stalked from the kitchen, her emotions whirling in a tempest of wild, disconnected thoughts. Delta had fully expected her to run to this man and marry him? Just like that? As she ordered a servant to bring her carriage around, Ruby recalled how her much older sister ran away to be a mail-order bride to a rancher in New Mexico. Ruby herself was 12 at the time, but she remembered a very angry Delta, 18 years old, refusing to marry the man their parents selected for her. The gentleman was much older than Delta, and one who had beat his previous, now deceased, wife with a buggy whip. In a fury, Delta put her name on an agency list, and at the first opportunity married Ezra Tobias. Her thoughts on Delta and the happy letters Delta had sent back home to her parents and her, Ruby climbed into her small carriage and snapped the whip over the horse. Just because Delta found happiness with a man who punched cows for a living does not mean I will. I love Boston, it is my home. She drove out of her parents' stately estate and out of the neighborhood of wealthy homes like hers toward the train station. I will bring the children back here, Ruby mused, guiding the horse through the streets toward the business part of Boston. They will receive a first-class education and find respectable people to marry. They will not grow up to punch cows. Whatever that means. Stepping down from the carriage at the station, Ruby went inside and spoke to the clerk about a train to Taos, New Mexico territory. The clerk blinked at her. To where, ma'am? He asked. Taos, Ruby repeated, then spelled it for him. After taking long moments to examine schedules, he finally said, I found it. The next train that passes through that town departs in 3 days' time. Do you wish to purchase a ticket? Yes. First class, please. After Ruby paid for her ticket, she returned home to discover her father had returned, and that he had already read Delta's letter. He sat in the parlor with the paper in his hand, his head bowed in grief. Father? Ruby said gently. James glanced up, lines of strain running around his eyes and mouth. Your mother tells me you're going to New Mexico. Are you going to marry this fellow? Of course not. Ruby strode into the room and sat down near him. I want to bring Daisy and Thomas home to Boston. They belong here, not with some cowboy who will never take proper care of them. James nodded slowly and handed the letter back to her. When do you leave? In 3 days. Go with God, then, daughter. And return home safely. Chapter 3. Listen to me, Ezra, Thelma said firmly as Ezra sat on the edge of the front porch, watching the sun go down over the mountains. He did not look around but heard his mother seat herself in the rocking chair behind him. Stephen didn't create this will because he did not trust you, Thelma continued. Your father and I are getting old. Too old to begin raising children again. Stephen knew this. Ezra bent to pick up a few pebbles from the dirt at his feet, and tossed them one by one, into the yard. And I am too irresponsible for the task, he said, his voice tight. So he'd rather see them into an orphanage? See the ranch he and Pa worked so hard for to become town property? That is not the way it is at all, Thelma insisted. Turn around and look at me when I speak to you. Too respectful of his mother to ignore an order like that, Ezra turned halfway around so that he presented his profile to her. If Stephen thought I could run the ranch and keep it a success, he'd have left it to me, he snapped. Without strings, without the risk of putting his kids in an orphanage. Stephen wanted you to get married, Thelma replied hotly, her voice making him turn his head to look at her. Think about it, boy. Those children need a mother. If you had your way, you would remain a perpetual bachelor, running the ranch, while Daisy and Tom grow up without a mother's love. Delta did not want that for her children. Her sister is unmarried, and a blood relative to them. And I suppose I must make it a marriage of convenience, he retorted bitterly. Have a wife whom I cannot abide, nor she me, let her raise the kids as she sees fit, just so I can keep the ranch in the family and provide a home for them. Yeah, Ma, Stephen and Delta really thought this thing through. Thelma gazed past his head to the sunset. Delta was certain you would love her sister, she said quietly. If she didn't have that certainty, she would not have asked it of you. Or of her. You know there's no guarantee of that, he gritted through his teeth. How do you, or even Delta, know she will consent to come out here to marry me? To even consider it. What if she's already married? She comes from money, as did Delta, so why would she leave her rich friends to live in Taos, New Mexico? So me and those kids are more than likely in trouble. This ain't no sure thing. I'll lose them and the ranch both simply because this woman says no. Like I said, they really thought this through. The sister is not married, Thelma replied quietly. Delta told me so. That still is no guarantee she will agree to this crazy notion. For goodness sakes, we're talking about people's lives here, and Stephen and Delta are playing celestial games with the futures of their children. I can't even believe you went along with this scheme, Ma. I did because it is the only way you will settle down with a wife. And besides, I never thought it'd be unnecessary. Ah, Ma, he murmured. You know I have been helping Stephen with this ranch for more than 2 years now. I'm ready to take care of Daisy and Tom. How much more settled can I be? With a wife. Ezra recognized the stubborn set to her mouth. And you have no notion that I may find a pleasant girl, on my own, and eventually marry her? Ezra spun back around and forcefully threw his handful of pebbles into the yard. It's not likely, son. There are very few eligible girls in Taos, and you know it. Not even you would be foolish enough to marry a saloon girl. Maybe I should walk away from this place, he snapped. If I can't run my own life, and make my own decisions, then why should I stay? To see my future dictated by people who are dead? Because you love Daisy and Tom more than anything. Swearing under his breath, Ezra stood up and strode across the yard toward the barn. This is ridiculous, he growled. That hoity-toity won't come out here. Even if she does, I won't like her, nor she me. Pacing around the barn, kicking at the loose straw on the floor, he recalled Daisy's and Tom's small faces. They looked up to him, now more than ever. They needed him, he realized, his anger and rebellion slowly draining away. If he had to sacrifice his future, he knew they were worth it. He sighed heavily, knowing there was no way around it. He was going to have to see that Ruby did marry him. Or at the very least, he had to give it a go. If she refuses to marry me, he muttered, then there's nothing I can do. I will have tried. And it'll be on Stephen and Delta for putting us all in this ridiculous position. Ruby disembarked the train in a dusty, cold, dry little town that held all the appeal of the Boston slums. Exhausted from the long journey, famished, she had little patience for the folks who jostled her on the wooden platform, and turned to find the porter tossing her bags out from the baggage compartment with as much care as he might toss a sack of potatoes. Be careful with those, she snapped at him. He ignored her and continued to throw the baggage belonging to other disembarking passengers on top of hers. Who in the world would want to come to this dismal place, she muttered as she gazed around at the plain clapboard structures with names such as Mercantile and Dry Good, a Sayer's office, the Trailside Saloon. Tiny homes clustered around them, and people walked along sidewalks. She noticed almost immediately that there were very few women, no children, nearly everyone she saw was a man. They rode tall horses with big saddles, wore cowboy hats and most, if not all, were armed. Some stood on street corners and talked, and some came and went from the saloon. Welcome to the Wild West, she groused, wondering how she was supposed to find her sister's ranch. I'm certain if I wait long enough, I'll be witness to a gunfight. No such gunfight commenced, and Ruby waited until everyone else had picked up their luggage to free hers. Fortunately, she had packed fairly lightly, mostly clothes, as she did not plan to stay in this horrid place a day longer than necessary. Carrying them in either hand posed little trouble as she walked into the town proper, again wondering how to find her niece and nephew. I dare say this place has no such things as public transport. Reading a sign that stated it was the sheriff's office with a 5-pointed badge, Ruby headed toward it. Putting one of her bags down to knock, she immediately opened the door and, picking up her bag again, stepped inside. She found a grizzled man with a drooping mustache sitting back in his chair with his dusty boots on the desk. His spurs had sunk deep into the wood. With his thumb, he tilted the hat covering his eyes and peered over at her. Without sitting up. Or removing the hat. Help you? Fetching a deep sigh at his slovenly, ungentlemanly behavior as well as the horrible situation she found herself in, Ruby reined in her temper. I am wondering if you might tell me how to get to the Tobias ranch. He pointed. 3 miles that way. Can't miss it. 3 miles? I am without conveyance, sir, she said stiffly. Am I expected to walk there? He eyed her sidelong. Conveyance? Without a carriage or horse, she snapped, vexed. Have you any transport in this town that I might hire to take me there? Transport? No, ma'am, we ain't got no transport here. Stifling her scream at the ludicrous idiot, Ruby forced her voice to speak below a shout. I can pay you a sum if you will agree to take me to the Tobias ranch. At last the feet came down off the desk, the spurs jingling, and the man stood up. Ruby gaped, cricking her neck to stare up at his vast height. She tried not to swallow as she saw how truly big he was. "I ain't got nothing better to do," he said. "It'd be my pleasure to take you there, ma'am." I thank you kindly, sir." He tipped his hat in a friendly fashion, then strode out the door, ducking his head as he did so. Picking up her bags, her mouth dry, Ruby followed him. He had vanished, and she stood on the walk, uncertain of what to do as men passed her by. They tipped their hats to her as they did, most saying nothing, a few others smiling and saying, "Hello, ma'am." After about 15 minutes, just as she thought the sheriff had abandoned her to walk the 3 miles, a large wagon drawn by 2 draft horses rolled up to her. The huge sheriff jumped down from the seat and picked up her bags and tossed them into the back. Ruby bit her tongue when it wanted to demand he be careful, then uttered a small shriek as he picked her up by her waist and set her on the high seat as easily as he might a child. She settled her skirts around her as he walked around to step up to sit beside her, then chirruped to the team. She hoped he wouldn't talk to her as he drove her down the road, but her hopes were dashed. "You're not from around here," he observed. "No. I just arrived from Boston." His piercing blue eyes swiveled to stare at her. "Boston, eh? Mrs. Tobias hailed from there, don't she?" "Yes. Delta Tobias was my sister." "I be right sorry for your loss, ma'am," he said. "I had a high opinion of her. Young Ezra Tobias be running the ranch now, I reckon. Good boy, that. You come to see your kinfolks?" "I've come to take Daisy and Thomas back to Boston with me, yes." He actually laughed. "Then I reckon you'll have a fight on your hands, ma'am. That Ezra won't let them kids go anyplace." "We shall see about that." In between snippets of conversation with the sheriff, whose name she did not bother to ask, Ruby gazed around the area the wagon rolled through. Her breath caught at its rugged, simple beauty, from the desert-like scrub to the jagged mountains right in front of her. Pine trees gathered in denser populations as they grew closer to the mountains. Not well traveled, Ruby was familiar with the ocean and the harbor, the green of Massachusetts. She had never seen mountains before, and they quite took her breath away. "Do these mountains have a name?" she asked. "The Spanish called them the Sangre de Cristo Mountains," he answered. "I reckon the name stuck." "They are beautiful." "Yup. I reckon they are." Brown and white cattle grazed in fields they passed, lifting their heads to gaze at the horses, the wagon, and the humans that rolled past their domain. "The Tobiases raise cattle?" she asked. "Sure do. One of the more successful ranches around here." "That boy knows his business." "That boy being Ezra Tobias." "Yup. His brother was lucky to have him." At last, the sheriff reined the team down a narrower lane that wound at the foot of the Sangre de Cristos, the desert-like barrenness giving way to pine and evergreen trees, and shorter shrubs she thought were called scrub oak. The lane widened into a yard with 2 pleasant-looking houses, blue smoke curling from their chimneys. A big barn stood nearby and horses in a pen whinnied at the newcomers. "Here ye be, ma'am," the sheriff said, reining in the team. He jumped down, and Ruby hoped to be able to clamber down before he seized her around the waist again. She didn't make it. He picked her up and set her on her feet, then fetched her bags from the wagon's bed. Ruby heard the house's door squeak as it opened, and she turned. "Hiya, Sheriff," said the young man who emerged. Her eyes met his. Instantly, Ruby felt her world turn upside down as she gazed into large hazel eyes framed by long lashes. He was tall, muscular, with broad shoulders and tanned skin. But his face, strong, lean, and as rugged as the mountains, Ruby swore she had never looked at a face more handsome. So many of the men in Boston were hardly worth her time, and none of them had the masculinity, the awesome power of the land built within him. And she could not look away from him to save her life. Chapter 4. Ezra stared, open-mouthed at Delta's sister. He knew it was her, for she resembled Delta in a way that could mean she was none other. She had black hair coiffed under a small flowered hat, and deep blue eyes that held a near shade of purple. A small oval face with a pure white complexion tilted up to him, and her full lips parted gracefully. I expect you're Ezra Tobias, she said in an odd lilting accent. He stammered. Yeah. I'm Ezra. You must be Ruby. Unable to stop them, Ezra's eyes traveled down her full bosom and tiny waist to her trim hips inside the traveling gown she wore. A thick cloak kept her warm against the winter chill. I had no idea you were coming, he said. Had you let me know, I would have met the train. Stepping down from the porch, Ezra shook her hand, forcing himself to look away from those incredible eyes. He grinned as he pumped Sheriff Winton's hand. Thanks for bringing her, Billy, he said. Weren't no trouble, boy, Billy Winton replied with a grin. Pleasure to. How's your ma and pa? Well enough, I suppose, Ezra replied, keeping an eye on Miss Berkley as she seemingly ignored them and gazed around the ranch with interest before digging inside the purse hanging from her wrist. I can get them if you want to say hello. Nah, boy, you got family to see to. I'll come by another time and pay a visit. You do that. Next time, we'll have you to supper. That promise I'll keep you to. He shifted his gaze. Ma'am. Here you are, Sheriff, she said, handing him some coin. Thank you kindly, he answered. Ezra saw Miss Ruby Berkley offer Billy a grave nod of thanks and wondered if she was as truly cold as she appeared. Beautiful, but as icy as a marble statue. Sure, right, she's gonna want to marry me. I hardly want to marry her either. Billy turned the team around and trotted them down the lane and vanished. Before Ezra could invite her inside and meet his parents, as well as her niece and nephew, Daisy and Tom opened the door. Instantly, her demeanor changed. The ice fell away, and a wide smile made her beautiful face absolutely stunning. Daisy, she asked, her voice thick. Thomas? Ezra had not told them about the will, or their parents' request that he marry their aunt. Thus, the two gazed at her, a mixture of shyness and puzzlement, before venturing further across the porch. Hello, ma'am, Daisy said in reply. Who are you? I am your Aunt Ruby, she said, stepping toward them. Your mother's sister. The shyness vanished instantly. Aunt Ruby? With nearly identical yelps of joy, Daisy and Tom launched themselves off the porch and into her arms. Ezra watched, with a combination of fascination and jealousy as she hugged them both to her, exclaiming over them, tears tracking down her cheeks. My goodness, she said, breathless, holding them at arm's length. You look so much like your mother. You look like Mama, too, Tom told her, grinning and throwing his arms around her waist again. Why did you take so long to come? Daisy asked. Mama said she invited you, but you never came. Miss Berkley cupped her cheek with the palm of her hand, her smile fading. I know, sweetie. It's my fault. I should have come sooner, to see her and to meet you a long time ago. What are my grandpa and grandma in Boston like? Tom demanded. Ezra almost chuckled when she floundered for a moment. Well, they are, people, I suppose. My father is tall, and my mother is, well, mother. I don't know how to explain them. Will they come here to see us, too? He asked. Ezra witnessed the sharp flashing glance she sent him. I don't know, Tom. They might. No doubt drawn by the sound of voices, Thelma and Fred emerged from the other house, and made their slow way toward the guest and the children. Fred walked unhurriedly to keep pace with Thelma, who could no longer make a full stride. These are my folks, Ezra said by way of introduction. Fred and Thelma Tobias. This is Miss Ruby Berkley. Daisy and Tom galloped to their grandparents, urging them to come meet their mysterious aunt from Boston. Ezra half expected the eyes to return, but Miss Berkley greeted them warmly, shook their hands, answering their questions about the long train trip. Ezra, his mother stated firmly. Collect her things and bring them into the house. Miss Berkley will stay in the guest room. Please, Miss Berkley told them, call me Ruby. All of you. Ezra picked up her baggage and followed the excited group into the house. Thelma sank into a chair, urging Ruby to sit beside her as Daisy and Tom all but hung on her arms. Fred nodded to Ezra as he, too, sat in an armchair. Ezra placed her bags in the guest room down the hall and wondered what to do next. Thus, he stood nearby and listened to the conversation, but added little to it. "You could almost be Delta's twin," Thelma marveled. "How many years are between you?" "6," Ruby replied with a smile. "She was 18 when she came out here to marry Stephen, and I was 12. Ezra hung back as the 3 adults and 2 children spoke of Delta and Stephen, the ranch, Boston, and a myriad of other topics. He watched Ruby's face, still stunned by her simple, elegant beauty, fascinated by her accent. Catching her occasional glances toward him informed Ezra that she was aware of him, but nothing in her expression told him what she thought. "Delta wrote and told her she wanted her to marry me. Did she come for that? Why did she come if she had no intentions of becoming my wife?" He studied her, trying to picture her saying yes to his proposal of marriage. Then he asked himself, "Do I want to marry her?" Ezra had no answer to that. True, she was beautiful, more beautiful than Delta. She seemed to be a pleasant enough person, but did that equate to a marriage with love, laughter, and hope? Christmas approached rapidly. How could he get to know her in time for the season and the limit expressed by the will? Why did she come? "It is time for supper," Thelma announced, rising stiffly. "Come, we must get busy." Ezra felt glad to see Ruby leap to her feet and hold his mother's arm to steady her. Thelma leaned against her as the women walked slowly toward the kitchen, Daisy and Thomas following happily like puppies. Fred waved at Ezra to sit, and after a long look at Ruby's back before it vanished, Ezra obeyed. "A very lovely young woman," Fred commented. "She would do you proud, boy." Ezra eyed his father with disillusion. "Pa, I have no idea if she came here to marry me." "Of course, she did." Fred snorted. "Why else is she here? To meet her niece and nephew? To take one look at me and run back to Boston in horror? What if I can't stand her and she can't stand me?" "Pa, she's been here barely 2 hours. We don't know anything." Fred nodded wisely. "You'd make a very nice couple." Ezra groaned and put his head in his hands. Supper was not quite the ordeal he had expected it to be, and Ruby not only helped fix supper, she was the primary cook. She ate with exquisite table manners, spoke happily with the children and his parents, and avoided Ezra's eyes. The food was excellent, and he tried not to let her obvious dislike for him trouble him very much. Except, he told himself glumly, if she didn't marry him, he'd lose the kids, the ranch, and his future. The days passed, and Ruby got to know Daisy and Tom better, as well as Thelma and Fred. Ezra remained an enigma, as he rode out most mornings to work the ranch and see to the cattle. While he spoke politely to her and continued to fascinate her, Delta's request that she marry him continued to hang over her head like a dark cloud. One gray cloudy day, cold with the hint of snow in the air, Ruby sat at the kitchen table with Thelma. Daisy and Tom were at the other house with Fred, who was their teacher in reading, writing, history, and arithmetic. She considered the education they'd receive in Boston, yet also pondered the implications of ripping them away from everything they had ever known. Ruby had not mentioned the contents of the letter she'd received from Delta to anyone, as she could not see herself remaining here and marrying Ezra. "I had no idea how close the children were to their grandparents before coming here. Can I do that to them? To Thelma? To Fred? What about Ezra, for he clearly loves them as he would his own offspring." "So," Thelma asked, breaking the silence, "what do you think of Ezra?" Startled, Ruby glanced at her, wondering if the older woman had read her mind. "He is a pleasant enough man," she replied, wary. "He works hard." "Delta informed me what was in the letter I sent you," Thelma continued, her light green eyes on Ruby's. "Did you come all this way to marry my boy?" Ruby glanced away, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "No," she said finally. "I came to take the children back to Boston." The sudden silence expanded, and Ruby finally gained courage enough to look back at Thelma. She watched Ruby without expression, yet Ruby felt a chill run through her. "That would be a mistake," Thelma said finally. "I know you believe they would be better off in a big city with all your money. But Daisy and Tom belong here. The opportunities for them are greater in Boston. Perhaps. And yet you would take them from everything they know and understand. Is that truly good for them, Ruby? Ruby stared down at the table and her coffee cup. I cannot marry Ezra, she whispered. Then this ranch reverts to the town, and the children will go into an orphanage. What? That is what Stephen and Delta's will states, Thelma replied, her tone cold. If Ezra and you do not marry, Ezra loses the ranch, and his guardianship of the kids. Certainly, you could take them back with you, Ruby, and raise them as your own. And turn your back on the rest of us, who will lose everything. Her mind whirling at the implications of what she had just been told, Ruby stared blindly into space. That's not right, she muttered. Why would Delta agree to such a thing? I reckon to ensure that her children were raised by a married couple who are their blood relatives, Thelma replied. Of course, you taking them to Boston accomplishes that to some degree, as you are a blood relation. But it also disregards the intent of your sister's will. But, Ruby stammered, desperate, feeling sick, but, how can I marry a man I barely know? Delta married my Stephen straight off the train, Thelma answered, taking a sip from her coffee. They loved one another completely, and truly. You have had an opportunity to meet Ezra and know him. Is it really that difficult to marry him? Yes, Ruby admitted. For me, it is. Thelma shook her head in resignation. Then all is for nothing. You must do what you feel you must do, Ruby. Rising stiffly with tears in her eyes, Thelma picked up her shawl to wrap over her shoulders, then walked slowly from the kitchen. Not watching her leave, Ruby nonetheless heard the door open and close as Thelma left. The sick feeling in her stomach had not departed, and she sat at the table wondering what to do. Trying to imagine herself marrying Ezra, sharing a house and her life with him, Ruby could not do it. Chapter 5. Tired after a long day of riding the fence line and checking the cattle, Ezra rode into the yard under swirling snow. He breathed in the scent of wood smoke, his breathing frosting on the cold air, and unsaddled his gelding. He fed and watered the horses in the corral, cared for the chickens and pigs, then walked to the house just as dusk fell. Ezra did not want to face another meal across the table from Ruby. True, he was attracted to her and knew that she held a warm and loving heart despite his first impression of her. He also knew she didn't like him, wouldn't look at him, and clearly did not come to Taos to marry him. But the reason she had come eluded him. Breathing deeply, he finally stepped into the warm house, and took off his heavy, sheepskin-lined coat. He scented roast chicken and boiling potatoes, his hunger gnawing at his stomach, listening to the sound of conversation from the kitchen. As usual since Ruby came, he found his parents, the children and Ruby there, Daisy and Ruby cooking. Hello, he said, glancing around the room as he entered. Evening, son, Fred answered while Tom gave him a happy grin. He kissed his mother's cheek and observed a sadness about her that had not been there the previous night when he had seen her last. Ruby, of course, did not turn around to either look at or speak to him, but Daisy left the stove to give him a hug. How are the cattle? Fred asked as Ezra sat down. As he usually did, Ezra gave his father a quick report of the ranch, the cattle, their weight and health. I saw a few fat deer, he said. Perhaps I should shoot one and we can have a nice venison stew. That sounds lovely, Thelma replied, but she did not smile as she spoke. Of course, Ruby did not contribute to the conversation, and she and Daisy served the meal as the talk at the table turned to Christmas. Are we going to the Christmas dance at the church? Daisy asked. It's this coming Saturday. Ezra remembered the Tobias family tradition of going to the annual dance, and of how Stephen and Delta never missed it. They always took Daisy and Tom, who enjoyed spending time with the other children from neighboring ranches. How can I deny it to them this year? He caught Thelma's eyes and replied, sure. Why not? Ruby served up the dinner and sat down at her place without looking at him or speaking. Would you like to come to the dance as well, Ruby? He asked, suspecting she would most likely explain how she planned to have a headache come Saturday. She glanced quickly at him, then at Daisy, who smiled at her eagerly. Ruby offered up a tentative upward quirk of her lips as she sat down at the table. "It sounds like fun," she answered. "Why ever not?" "Yay," Daisy exclaimed. "I can't wait to see Missy Eldridge. It's been months since I saw her last." Missy is Daisy's best friend, Tom explained to no one in particular, leaning his elbow on the table as he nibbled at his chicken. "Sit up straight, young man," Thelma ordered him sternly. "Elbow off the table." Tom obeyed her immediately but continued to pick at his food. "Can we go into town?" he asked. "I have to ride up into the high country tomorrow," Ezra answered. "I won't be able to take you, and Grandpa needs to stay here with Grandma." "I can take them," Ruby said quietly, glancing at him for the first time. "I would like to send a letter to my parents in Boston." "Can we go, Uncle?" Daisy pleaded. "There are things I need for Christmas baking," Thelma added. "If Ruby doesn't mind picking them up for me." "No, I'd be happy to." "Can I get some candy, Grandma?" Tom asked. "You want sweets when you won't even eat your dinner?" Thelma frowned. "I should say not." Tom immediately began eating with more gusto, devouring his chicken and potatoes as though suddenly famished. When once he'd have found the sight amusing, Ezra felt only sadness that Stephen and Delta were not here to see their children grow up. For that matter, I may never see them grow up. A wave of grief and depression rolled over him, and he, despite his earlier hunger, barely finished his own meal. "I'll hitch the wagon for you in the morning," he said without looking at Ruby. "Hopefully there won't be much snow on the ground." "Thank you." As soon as he finished eating, Ezra excused himself from the table, and donned his heavy coat to bring in enough firewood to last through the night and into the morning for cooking breakfast. As he worked, he wondered how long Ruby would stay before she returned to Boston and took all hopes of inheriting the ranch and his guardianship of Daisy and Tom with her. His anger, simmering below the surface of his emotions ever since learning about the conditions of the will, intensified once more. He chopped the wood with more force than necessary, splinters flying under each blow of his axe. Snow fell thicker and heavier, but there was little wind to make him feel the cold as he chopped the wood into chunks and took them indoors to stack. Thelma and Fred sat in the sitting room, watching the fire blaze on the hearth, and whatever their thoughts were, Ezra couldn't read them on their faces. The exercise did little to assuage his anger, and he dared not speak for fear of taking it out on them. From the noises in the kitchen, Ruby and the kids were still cleaning up after the meal. He stacked plenty of wood beside the hearth and the stove in the kitchen, then went back outside to chop more wood for the fires in his parents' house. Glad for the chore that permitted him to stay away from Ruby, Ezra contemplated the idea of asking her to marry him, for the sake of Daisy and Tom. "Of convenience," he muttered, stacking wood and feeding the hearth fire. "In name only. Together, yet living separate lives." He could move back in with Thelma and Fred, leave her to share the other house with the children. And what happens in 10 years when they grow up, he asked himself, stacking more wood. Divorce, and go our separate ways? Ezra had no problem with that, he didn't want to get married anyway. That would free Ruby to return to Boston if she chose. Despite the sense that scenario made, he knew she'd never agree to it. Her life was in Boston among the wealthy. His was here working a ranch. Why would she give that up? Chapter 6. After the supper dishes were cleared away, Ruby sat alone in the sitting room, staring at the fire on the hearth. Thelma and Fred had returned to their own house, and Daisy and Tom had gone to bed. She had no idea where Ezra was. Feeling wretched and alone, she thought about Delta's will and letter, all but demanding she marry Ezra. Now lives will be ruined if I do not marry him. True, the children would come to Boston with her, and they would have solid futures ahead of them. Even if the will stated they be turned over to an orphanage if she did not marry Ezra by Christmas, who in New Mexico would chase her to Boston to demand she release the children. "The will isn't fair, Delta," she murmured. "Why would you write such? Asking me to marry him is one thing, but to take away everything in Ezra's life if I refuse is quite another." Thelma and Fred would be turned from their home if the town took the ranch. The very ranch that Fred spent his life building. "What were you and Stephen thinking?" she muttered. That Daisy and Tom have us for parents. Ruby spun around in her chair, seeing Ezra at the entrance to the sitting room, snow dusting his heavy coat. His hazel eyes, reflected in the firelight, gazed at her, and she detected no emotion on his face at all. "That is a great deal to ask of two strangers," she replied. "I agree," he said, stepping closer, and removing his coat to hang on a peg. "I reckon my brother didn't trust me to do right by those kids." "I'm certain that's not true. Isn't it?" Ezra made a gesture toward a chair, his brow hiked in the unasked question. Ruby nodded. "Please." Ezra sat down, rubbing his hands together to warm them. "Stephen and Pa always considered me reckless, a rebel," he said slowly. "Since Pa retired, I've worked beside Stephen to expand this ranch to make it a success. I'm prepared to raise those kids as my own, give them a good life, and I can't. Unless you're willing to marry me." When he looked at her, Ruby cut her eyes away instantly. "Thelma informed me of the will," she said slowly, staring at her hands. "Delta sent me a letter, through your mother, asking me to come here and be your wife, and a mother to Daisy and Thomas. I am not certain I can do that." "I wouldn't expect that you would," Ezra replied, his voice low. "But what if we married in name only? Live separately, raise the kids, then go our separate ways? Could you do that?" Ruby felt a shiver of despair run through her. "Boston is my home," she whispered. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ezra lean forward to rest his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. "I reckon it is too much to ask. You'll be taking the train back, I reckon, and once the town takes the ranch, Daisy and Tom will go to the orphanage in Santa Fe." Ruby dared not tell him of her plans to take the children with her to Boston. While he may agree to it, understanding it was far better for them than an orphanage, she knew that he would never see them again. "I'm so sorry." "Are you? You're the only one who doesn't stand to lose by any of this." "I am sorry," she repeated, firmly, in the face of the hardness in his voice. "I wish Delta and Stephen hadn't put you into this awful position. But you cannot take it out on me. This is not my fault." Ezra rubbed his hands over his face. "You're right," he said. "It's not your fault. I must say something, Ruby, and I hope you accept it the right way, for I will never say it again." "What?" she asked, watching him carefully. "Had you been willing," he said slowly, still gazing downward, "I'd have married you freely. You have a warm and kind heart, and I can easily see you raising Tom and Daisy and becoming the mother they need. I might even have fallen in love with you, given the time. But you could never see in me the same thing, and consent to be my wife." Ezra stood up, still not looking at her or waiting for a response. "I'll leave you now. Good night." After he had gone to his room and closed the door, Ruby continued to gaze into the fire, taken aback by his words. He could fall in love with me. He just showed her a side of him that she never suspected was there. A strong, mature man with a heart that could love. Not just love anyone at all. Ezra could fall in love with her. But could she fall in love with him? Ruby never before sat down to examine her own feelings. In Boston, the men who wanted to court her were shallow, pompous idiots who were more interested in showing her off to their friends at parties rather than men who truly wanted Ruby for herself. She had recognized that immediately. They wanted a prize. Ezra wanted love. Did I presume that Ezra would be the same as those others? That he would only want me as a trophy on his arm? Not even her parents had ever told her she had a warm, kind heart and would be an excellent mother. Truly, Ruby herself never before considered that she might make someone happy simply by being herself. Staring into the fire, her knees now drawn up under her chin, Ruby thought about Ezra and how she felt about him. Though she didn't like admitting it to herself, she knew she was drawn to him. He was attractive, handsome, and had a sweet, boyish grin that endeared him to her. He, too, was kind and loving, with a strength that made his warmth more appealing rather than a denigration to his masculinity. Ruby couldn't help but also think of how attached Daisy and Thomas were to him. Her stomach wrenched at the thought of taking them away from not just Ezra, but Thelma and Fred as well. "Am I doing the right thing?" she asked herself. It is right, but is it for their sake I would take them away, or would it truly be for my own sake? She had no answer for that as she spent most of the night in the chair, staring at the fire. Chapter 7. Ezra had already ridden out for the day, but a team of mules patiently stood hitched to a big wagon with their lead rein tied to the post. About an inch of snow lay on the ground, the pine trees across the yard wearing mantles of white. Ruby found the air cold under the bright sunlight, yet not unbearably so, and suspected the snow would not last long. "Hurry up, Tom," Daisy yelled, wearing a deep hood over her head, and a heavy wool cloak that covered her from her shoulders to her heels. Ruby waited for Tom before climbing up to the wagon seat herself. Daisy needed no assistance, but Ruby thought Tom, being smaller, might. At last he ran from the house with his coat and flat-brimmed hat, Thelma standing at the door to wave goodbye. "I can do it," Tom insisted, then climbed up the spokes of the wheel to jump into the wagon bed. Her eyes gritty from the lack of sleep the night before, Ruby untied the mules, then lifted her heavy skirts to clamber up to the seat. "We'll be back by mid-afternoon," she called to Thelma. "Be safe." Ruby clucked to the mules, slapping their rumps with the reins, and the wagon lurched forward as the team broke into a swift trot. Daisy and Tom spoke with excitement over the trip into Taos, and Ruby was forced to slow them down and not talk over one another. Half listening to their chatter, she pondered her nearly sleepless night, the questions for which she had no answer to. Was it selfishness or was it truly in the children's best interest to take them to Boston? Could she marry Ezra and be happy? Delta found happiness and contentment living in the West, could Ruby? "Aunt Ruby, will you buy us candy?" Daisy asked, bringing her out of her reveries. "If you promise you'll eat all your dinner," she answered. "I will. I promise." "I promise, too," Tom added from where he stood behind the seat, gazing over her shoulder. "If the wagon hits a rut," Ruby warned him, "you could fall." "Nah," he answered. "I won't fall." As she had while riding to the ranch with the big sheriff, Ruby admired the landscape, now covered in a blanket of white. Birds still flew through the sky, and deer bolted in panic. Her mouth dropped when she saw a group of smallish, light brown creatures who galloped away from their threat. "What were those animals?" she asked. "Antelope," Daisy replied. "Very good to eat, too." "Can we have antelope for our Christmas dinner, Aunt Ruby?" Tom asked. "I don't know," she answered. "I suppose that will be up to your uncle to kill one." Hawks called to one another high overhead while rabbits fled in terror. Once again, she gaped at a huge rabbit with tremendous ears that ran across their road. "Jackrabbit," Daisy replied to her questioning look. "You don't got jackrabbits in Boston?" "No. Parks might have a few cottontails, but that's all." "What sort of animals does Boston have?" Tom inquired. "Well," Ruby said slowly. "Outside of the horses, people have dogs and cats as pets. Both are needed to keep the rat population down." "Rats?" Daisy stared at her with wide eyes. "You?" "Yes, they are nasty. There are lots of pigeons in Boston. In the harbor, whales sometimes swim in." "What's a harbor?" Daisy asked at the same time Tom asked, "What's a whale?" Thus, Ruby explained that Boston was a big city on the coast, and ships and boats moor there. They come from all over the world. A whale is a big fish that swims in the deepest parts of the ocean. "Wow," Daisy exclaimed. "Can we visit there?" Ruby bit her tongue before saying how she planned to take them both there to live permanently. "I hope so," was all she replied. In the town of Taos, she found things much the same as her previous visit: cowboys on big horses with ropes and guns at their sides, piano music drifting from the saloon, and a few women walking along the sidewalks or coming and going from the mercantile store. She tied the mules to a post, then she and the children went into the shop. Ruby had cash in her handbag and bought each of them some candy. "Now I need to post this letter," she told them. "Wait for me here and do not touch anything." "We won't," Daisy assured her. "We'll just look." Leaving them to walk around and gaze at the merchandise, Ruby walked quickly down the street to mail her letter. The train station wasn't much further away, and, with no little guilt riding her, Ruby hurried to it, and went inside. 3 tickets to Boston, please. First class. The clerk took her money and issued the tickets, barely looking at her. Ruby shoved them into her bag, then walked quickly back to the mercantile shop. Taking the list of items Thelma needed, as well as what Fred had added, Ruby ordered everything from the clerk. Expecting to pay Boston prices, she discovered to her pleasure that everything she had asked for came much cheaper. After paying the clerk, she handed the packages to Daisy and Tom to take to the wagon. As they obeyed her, Ruby started to leave with them, then halted. Here's a perfect opportunity to buy a few Christmas gifts for everyone. She browsed, looking at different items, thinking of Thelma, Fred, and the children, and knew she should perhaps buy a small gift for Ezra. Thinking of him brought a small flutter to her stomach. The train tickets she had purchased departed a few days before Christmas, but that was no reason she couldn't leave gifts for the family. After all, it would only be polite, and she was fond of them. Thelma and Fred, anyway. Daisy stuck her head in the door. "Aunt Ruby, come on. Wait for me in the wagon," she ordered, and Daisy's head vanished. She bought a new gown for Thelma, a pocket watch for Fred, candy and toys for Tom, a sunbonnet and a book for Daisy, then puzzled over what to buy Ezra. She felt she knew the others yet knew nothing of Ezra's tastes. At last, she chose a silver hatband for his cowboy hat, and had the clerk wrap everything up well into a single large bundle. "What's that, Aunt Ruby?" Tom asked, standing in the back of the wagon. "Ask me no questions," Ruby replied, shoving the package under the seat, "and I shall tell you no fibs." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means it's none of your business," Daisy retorted. Ezra shot and killed a large plump buck with a full set of antlers in the high mountains, then dressed it out. The carcass was heavy, but after much swearing and grunting, he tied it over his saddle. Up this high, the snow was far deeper than below and came up over his knees as he led his horse down the mountainside. As he floundered through the snow, his rifle in one hand and his reins in the other, Ezra imagined every scenario he could think of to convince Ruby to marry him. "I can't lose the kids, and the ranch," he muttered. "I can't lose anything more." Through the thinning of the trees, Ezra paused to catch his breath, gazing out over the plains far below. From here, it almost seemed as though he could see all the way to California. "Lord," he said. "As it's almost your birthday, might you do me a small favor? Help Ruby to marry me and let us fall in love while you're at it. Amen." Continuing on, Ezra struggled through the snow, sweating heavily under his hat and heavy coat, yet he dared not take either off. It was far colder up here than below, and his sweat could easily freeze on him, and give him a chill. Before him, the snow lay pristine and without tracks of the wild forest creatures that lived up here. Birds flitted from tree to tree, chirping, and often caused a wayward dead leaf to fall to the snow below. Ezra wasn't far from the ranch, yet still high above, when he felt his right boot slide between 2 hard rocks. At the same moment, his gelding stumbled over something hidden beneath the snow, and knocked into him. While one or the other might not have been an issue by themselves, the two together created a catastrophe. Ezra felt his ankle snap. Blinding pain shot up from his foot to this thigh, and he screamed. Falling helpless to the snow, he writhed in agony, trying to yank his foot clear of what had trapped it. Fresh sweat tracked down his face, yet he felt icy cold all over. His vision swam, and he fought to remain conscious. At last, the worst of the flaring pain passed, and he lay in the snow, panting. His foot free, he sat up, envisioning how he was to get down the mountain with a broken foot. Pulling up his pants, he shoved snow down into his boot to keep the inevitable swelling down, then pulled his pants back down over his boot. Picking up his rifle from the snow where he had dropped it, he set it butt down, muzzle up, on the ground. Gazing up at his horse, he said, "You have to help me." The gelding whiffled his lips across Ezra's face, then snorted down his neck. "Good answer," Ezra replied. Seizing a handful of the horse's thick mane with one hand, and using the rifle with the other, Ezra hauled himself upright to stand, gasping, on his healthy foot. He leaned against his horse's saddle and pondered leaving the buck behind so he could ride. No, he decided. We need it. Glancing around, Ezra spotted what might be a log under the snow, and led his horse to it, hopping on one leg. He brushed the snow off it, then carefully stood on it to give himself greater height. He shoved the rifle into its scabbard. Now stand still, big guy, he muttered, stroking his horse's neck. This is gonna be awkward for us both. Launching himself off the log with his good leg, Ezra lay, belly down, over the deer. His horse turned his head to regard him quizzically but stood still as he struggled to throw his injured leg over and sit aboard the carcass. Panting, his foot throbbing, he wiped sweat from his eyes, and gazed down from a height to his horse. Now I don't have any reins. Both reins lay on the trampled snow, hanging from the gelding's bit. With a shrug, Ezra clucked to his gelding. Go on now. Take me home. While trained to stand still with his reins on the ground, the gelding still obeyed the soft one-sided kick to his ribs and the cluck. He ambled down the mountain, occasionally stepping on a rein, but walked at a quiet pace toward home. You earned extra oats tonight, big guy, Ezra panted out as his gelding took him home. Chapter 8. Between Fred, Tom, and herself, Ruby unharnessed the mules and led them to their corral. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had dropped, and the wind picked up, and dark clouds blew in from the mountains. By now, she knew what horse Ezra usually rode, and noticed the animal was not in the pen with the others. I hope that boy of mine gets in quick, Fred muttered as he waved Tom back into the house to get warm. We got another storm moving in. Surely, he would see it coming and get back quickly? Ruby asked, helping Fred hang the heavy harness in the barn. He may not see it, Fred answered. Trees will block his sight. Even as they emerged from the barn, thick, heavy snow began to fall, whirling through the dull gray afternoon. Ruby grew concerned as Fred muttered worriedly under his breath and gazed around at the early signs of a blizzard. He's experienced, she said. He'll be all right. I hope so, Fred replied, staring through the murk toward the mountains. He started to turn back, his hand raised to gesture, then spun around, staring intently toward the forest. What? Ruby asked, following his gaze and seeing nothing save swirling snow. What in tarnation is that? Fred asked, his tone sharp as he pointed. Ruby drew in a sharp breath as a strangely shaped shadow emerged from the snow, walking steadily toward them. My heavens, she gasped, a chill, not from the cold, ran through her. What is that? Their answer came when the shadow whinnied and was answered by the others in the corral. It's Ezra. Fred gasped. Something's wrong. Fred hurried toward the shadow and Ruby followed, her heart pounding. What looked like a man on a horse did not quite look right to her, yet she went toward him. Growing closer, she saw Ezra, his head bouncing loose on his neck with every step the horse took, sitting aboard a dead buck. Ezra, Fred shouted, grabbing the horse's reins that trailed under his hooves. Ezra. Ezra lifted his face, and Ruby was close enough to see how pale the skin of his face had become. She recognized that gray tinge to his color as shock. He's hurt. What happened? Fred yelled up at him as though Ezra were deaf. Broke my foot, Ezra mumbled. His fingers waggled in the direction of his right boot. Lead the horse to the house, Ruby ordered briskly. I'll take care of him if you care for the horse. All right. Fred stumped toward the house, the gelding following him while Ruby gazed up at Ezra. At the porch, she thumped her fist on his left thigh. Slide down here, Ezra, she commanded. I'll catch you. Ezra grinned down at her. Little bitty, you gonna catch me? Fred stood at her side. We'll both catch you. Come on down from there. Ezra leaned forward over the dead deer and lifted his right leg over the horse's rump. His left foot found his stirrup, and he groaned as he eased himself down, hanging on to the deer's antlers as he did. At the last second, he let go, and fell hard against Ruby and Fred. He was heavy, but between the two of them, Ruby and Fred kept him upright on his healthy left foot. Ruby ducked under one arm, Fred the other, and together they got him up the stairs and into the house. Thelma gave a sharp cry as they burst inside, and both Daisy and Tom ran forward to help. "Sit him down there," Thelma demanded. "What happened?" Ruby and Fred got Ezra into an armchair and let go of him as he sat down heavily. Ruby instantly knelt at his right boot. "He said he broke his foot," she said. "Do you have any laudanum?" "Yes." Thelma hurried as fast as she could toward the kitchen. "Young uns," Fred said, gesturing, panting, "get your coats on. I need your help." Ruby hardly noticed as the three of them hurried out the door as she studied the big boot that had to come off. Pulling it loose from his foot would no doubt cause Ezra great agony, but there was little choice. She gazed up at him as he yanked his hat off and started to unbutton his coat. "You know what I have to do." Ezra nodded. "Do it." Bracing herself against the pain she would cause him, Ruby slowly, as gently as she could, worked the boot from his foot. Ezra thrashed in the chair, his hands gripping the arm so tightly his knuckles showed white, but he did not yell out. Expecting a great deal of swelling to hinder her, Ruby felt amazement when it slid off easier than she expected. Lightly touching his sock, she found it icy cold and wet. "You put snow inside your boot." Gasping for breath, sweating profusely, Ezra nodded. "Very smart." Ruby peeled his sock off, holding his leg up by his calf, and studied the break. It looked like the bone had broken just above his ankle joint and had not pierced his skin. The skin around it was starkly bruised and red, and with the boot off, began to swell. Thelma returned with a brown bottle and rolls of cloth, muttering either prayers or imprecations under her breath. "How bad?" she asked, sitting down on the sofa. "It could be far worse," Ruby replied, frowning at the break. "Do you know what you're doing?" Ezra asked, his voice thick. "As it happens, I do," she replied. "I worked assisting doctors at a charity hospital for a year. I can set this fairly easily. Had you actually fractured your ankle joint, well, I dare say you'd be in bed for 6 months and have a limp for the rest of your life." "Ah." Ruby eyed him. "It would be better if you were asleep for this, Ezra. For one, it will be less strenuous on you, and for another, you being asleep will relax your tendons and ligaments. I'll dose you with the laudanum and keep your swelling down with snow until you are out. I won't argue with you, document." After cradling his broken leg on a footstool piled high with a folded blanket, Ruby poured laudanum into a glass. She watched as he drank it all down, grimacing at the taste. "Now just let yourself go to sleep, Ezra." He nodded as she headed to the kitchen for a bucket. Going out the back door, Ruby discovered that though it was late afternoon, the storm and the blizzard made the sunlight so dim it appeared to be early dusk. Sparing a worry for Fred and the children, she scooped snow into the bucket and closed the door. Ezra was drowsy but not yet asleep as Ruby packed snow around the break to keep the swelling down. "Why are they not back yet?" she mused, worried, and opened the front door to gaze out in the storm. "Probably feeding the stock," Thelma explained. "Close the door." Ruby did, hoping Fred and the children would return soon, then realized barely 15 minutes had passed since she and Fred brought Ezra into the house. "They'll find their way back in a blizzard, won't they?" she asked, rubbing her arms, worried. "Fred knows this place upside down and backward," Thelma replied, watching Ezra's face. "He won't let anything happen to those children." Ruby peered through the window, still concerned. Turning, she found Ezra unconscious, and knelt once more at his injured foot. She took a deep breath, her hands on his ankle, and glanced at Thelma. "This will be quick," she said. Tentative, Ruby moved his foot from side to side, feeling the bone move where it should not. She held her breath. With a sharp twist, she felt the bone slide into place, and then breathed again. "It worked," she said, reaching for the roll of bandages. Binding Ezra's foot and ankle tightly, Ruby then wrapped more snow in a cloth and held it to where the break had been. Ezra breathed slowly and evenly, his head against the back of the chair. "That was easier than I feared," she admitted, glancing up at Thelma. "I don't think a doctor could have done it better," Thelma replied with a smile. The door opened on a gust of cold wind and snow about 30 minutes later, bringing in 3 figures covered in white. Rising, Ruby went to help them with their coats, urging them to sit by the fire. "What took so long?" she asked. "Had to get that buck hanging in the barn," Fred groused, wiping ice from his face. "Ezra went to a lot of trouble to keep it." "We got the horses into the barn," Tom added, shivering, wet running down from his hair. "Had to feed and water them." "How's Uncle Ezra?" Daisy asked, rubbing her arms as she gazed at the sleeping man. "He broke his leg," Ruby answered, grabbing the blankets Thelma fetched and throwing them over the children's shoulders. "He'll sleep in the chair tonight. Tomorrow, we'll get him into his room." "I think a hot soup is in order for dinner this evening," Thelma said, hobbling toward the kitchen. "Daisy, you and Tom watch over your uncle," Ruby said. "I'll help with supper." Chapter 9. Pain woke him in the depths of the night. Ezra groaned, fighting against the strange after-effects of the laudanum, licking his dry lips. The fire still burned brightly on the hearth, and he felt hot, too hot, and thrashed, throwing off the blanket that covered him. "Hush, now," a voice soothed him. "You need to stay warm." "Hot," he muttered. "So hot. Drink some water. It will help." A cup was held to his lips, and he drank thirstily, the cold water cooling him and comforting his dry throat. He drank it down, and another was right there immediately. He swallowed that one too, and finally blinked in the firelight. Ruby stood over him, tucking the blanket around his shoulders. "You," he began, then tried again. "You set my foot." "Yes." "The pain woke you?" "Yeah. Really hurts." "I can give you a small dose of laudanum," she said. "It'll help the pain and for you to go back to sleep." "Thanks, document." He saw her quick smile as she poured a small dollop into a glass, added more liquid from a bottle, then held it to his lips. "This has some brandy in it," she said, her voice soft. "It'll help you sleep." He drank the noxious liquid, then chased it with another cup of cold water. His eyes shifted past her to the sofa, and the blanket and pillow on it. "You're watching over me." "As your parents are too old," she replied, "and Tom and Daisy too young, I'm your best choice." Ezra rested his head against the back of the chair and looked at the firelight dancing across the ceiling beams. He heard the wind howling outside the house, and suspected they'd be snowed in by morning. Ruby took a bucket and went outside briefly, letting in a blast of cold air that effectively stole the last of the excessive heat from his body. Ruby knelt at his foot, propped up on a blanket on the footstool, then packed snow around it. "It's best if we can keep the swelling down," she said, glancing up at him. "The cold feels good," he muttered. "Yes. It'll also numb your pain." As she stood, Ezra grabbed her hand and pressed it to his lips before she could snatch it away. "You're good to me, Doc," he muttered, smiling up at her. Ruby gaped for a moment before gently removing her hand from his grasp. "You need to get some sleep." "You sleep too, document." He closed his eyes, feeling the laudanum creep through him and send him toward unconsciousness, then felt her fingers on his brow. "Sleep," she whispered. Ezra obeyed. The following morning, the blizzard had blown itself out, and Ezra was lugged between Fred and Ruby into his own room. His pain made the sweat pour from his brow, but he felt a little better once he was lying flat out in his bed. Ruby left the room so that Fred could undress him, then returned with breakfast on a tray. "Laudanum can create its own problems," Ruby said, sitting on the edge of his bed so she could help him eat. "You can have a little more for 3 more days, then that's it." "No more." "By then, my pain should be less," Ezra replied as she helped him to sit up, plumping pillows behind his back. "I hope." As she fed him bacon, eggs, fried potatoes, and ham, she went on about her plans for him. "Packing your break in snow will help you to heal faster," she said. "We need to do that at least 3 times a day." Hungrily, he ate the food while watching her beautiful face, her purple-blue eyes. "I'm leaving the chores to you all," he mumbled around a mouthful of crispy bacon. "Daisy, Tom and I are perfectly capable of taking care of things," she replied. Until some of the snow melts, Thelma and Fred will stay in this house. But as the sun is already melting the snow, most of it will be gone by this evening. I'm looking forward to venison stew. Ruby glowered as she fed him. Is that why you worked so hard to bring that beast back? She demanded. Ezra shrugged. In winter, we need extra meat. The hide can come in handy, too. This isn't Boston where food is plentiful, even in the worst of winter. That seemed to silence her, for she glanced down at his plate and scooped more eggs onto it. I suppose out here in the Wild West, survival can't be taken for granted, she murmured after a few moments. Not really, he replied, watching her beautiful face for hints that perhaps she was warming up to him finally. We have slaughtered pigs and yearling calves hanging in the smokehouse. In the root cellar, we have jars of vegetables, sacks of potatoes and onions, as well as extra flour, salt, coffee and beans. All together, we should have enough to last until spring. But even so, fresh meat isn't just nice to have once in a while, it also makes everything last longer. Ruby smiled. This is all so very different from what I'm used to in Boston. After her rejection of him the night before last, Ezra didn't want to mention her staying. What is Boston like? He didn't let himself wonder why she fed him when he was perfectly capable of feeding himself. It's very big, she answered, forking potatoes into his mouth. The traffic on the streets is heavy, and in winter, the snow and mud mix together to make a very nasty mess as the horses churn it up. The harbor brings in the smell of fish. In summer, it's quite nice, even if the traffic is still heavy. I suppose you eat seafood there. Ruby nodded. Quite delicious. Fish, crab, lobster. You'd like the food. I'm not so sure about that, he said with a grimace. Crawly things with long legs. Sounds like you're eating bugs. Chuckling, she replied, crab legs and lobster tails are quite delicious, actually. All the best restaurants serve them. I'll take your word for it. After breakfast, Ruby rested his wrapped foot on a folded blanket, then packed a cloth full of snow and ice around his ankle. You leave that be for a while. I'm going to clean up the dishes, then I'll be back. Try to get some sleep. Ezra did his best. He lay back and closed his eyes, but the nagging pain, in spite of the cold pack, would not permit him to sleep. Never one to sit still for very long, and as he seldom got sick, lying in bed with nothing to do was as much a torment for him as his pain. He brightened as his mother hobbled in and pulled a chair up beside the bed. Hey, he said. How are you feeling, son? She asked. All right, outside of my foot hurting like crazy. This will be difficult for you to lie here, she told him with a small smile. You are so active. Ezra grunted. How will the chores get done? The ranch still needs to be looked after. Your father and the young uns can do the chores, Thelma replied. Ruby already offered to help. The cattle will be fine without you babysitting them. And if the fence breaks and the cattle get out? Thelma gave a small shrug. If and when that happens, we'll worry about it then. Ezra lay his head back against his pillow. Maybe the neighbors will help. Stephen and I helped round up and brand their cattle when Old Man Smith got pneumonia. See? Now you stop worrying over things you can't control and concentrate on getting better. It's going to be a rather interesting Christmas, he commented dryly, wondering when Ruby planned to leave for Boston. His mother gazed down at her hands in her lap, the sadness he had noticed earlier filling her expression. He frowned. Ma? Son, she began, but Ruby's entrance into his room interrupted her. Time to remove the snow, she said brightly, bustling in. Thelma stood up, and hobbled out, and Ezra thought she was about to weep. Chapter 10. Surprisingly, Ruby found herself feeling content and needed in the routine of helping with the ranch chores, cooking, and caring for Ezra. In Boston, she and her parents had servants to perform the daily work, leaving her free to read, write poetry, or go for walks in the parks. She never thought she could fully enjoy having work on her hands, and people who depended upon her. Tom and Daisy threw themselves into their chores with enthusiasm, and on decent days, Fred saddled up to ride the pastures and check on the cattle. Ruby suspected Ezra felt no little frustration in lying in his bed while others did his work for him. "Your leg seems to be healing well so far," she said after changing his wrap and inspecting the break. The doc agrees. For she had insisted that the doctor check her work to be sure she'd done things correctly. He'd come and seemed well pleased. "The sooner I get up the better," he grumbled, scowling. She carefully rewrapped his ankle, and then left to fetch snow and ice to pack around it. "I imagine you're becoming quite bored lying here." He nodded. "The books help, and having the kids come sit with me gives me something to do." At the mention of Daisy and Tom, Ruby recalled uneasily that she would be taking them back to Boston in a week's time. Ezra would be bed-bound for a month after that, at least, and his care as well as the ranch would be in the hands of an elderly couple. Again, she wondered if her actions were for the children or for herself. "Thank you for your care of me," Ezra said suddenly. "And for helping us out." "You are quite welcome," she replied, not looking at him and focusing on her task. "You've come to mean a great deal to the children," he went on, his voice low. "And to my parents." Ruby heard him hesitate before adding, "and to me." Her heart thumped in thick, hard strokes, and her mouth dried up. "Whatever do you mean?" she asked, trying to buy time as she pondered how to reply to that. "Whether you want me to or not," he went on, "I'm beginning to fall in love with you." Oh. Finished with the wrapping, Ruby still could not look at him. Staring at her hands, she fought to find something to say. Suddenly frightened, she wanted to flee the room and his eyes, yet as she had accepted the responsibility of caring for him, she would need to come back eventually. Ruby heard his soft snort. "Obviously, you don't have the same feelings for me," he said, his tone subdued. "You'll soon be gone. It might have been better to have never come here in the first place." His words struck her harder than she ever thought possible. Fighting to get her own emotions under control, Ruby drew a deep breath, and looked up to meet his hurt gaze. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Ezra. Leaving here will the hardest thing I've ever done. I cannot say I am falling in love with you as well, for that wouldn't be truthful. However, I can say with honesty that I have become fond of you." "Fond enough to stay here and marry me?" he asked. "To be Daisy and Tom's mother?" Her guilt overwhelmed her. Ruby stood and fled from him. Finding refuge in the sitting room beside the fire, she gazed into the hearth. The children had gone to Thelma and Fred's house for their afternoon tutoring, and for the moment, there were no chores that needed to be done. She opened the door to gaze outside and considered taking a walk, since the weather had calmed considerably in the last day or two. The air was cold and the wind brisk, but Ruby donned her warm cloak with the hood, and closed the door behind her. Leaving the yard, she passed the other house and walked down the lane, trying to decide what she should do. "I do care for him," she murmured, gazing around at the fields, the cattle grazing in the distance. "Is it enough to say love will follow?" Striding along the packed dirt lane, Ruby thought about her life of leisure in Boston, her prospects of one day marrying a man of equal wealth and privilege. If she wanted to, she could remain single all her life, become the spinster her mother declared her to be. One day, she would inherit the family wealth and property and had no need of a husband to support her. Is that what I want? Ruby realized it was not. She wanted children of her own as well as Daisy and Tom. She craved the love of a man who loved her in return. Was Ezra the answer to all that? She didn't know. In Boston, caring for someone of equal wealth and status was certainly enough reason to marry him or her. However, Ruby knew, it was not enough in her own mind. If I returned to Boston with Tom and Daisy, she mused, strolling along and hugging her arms across her stomach to keep her warm under the brisk wind, might I find love as well? Suspecting that if she were to find it in Boston, she'd have found it by now, Ruby let her thoughts rove to Ezra. He was, she admitted to herself, everything she had ever hoped to have in a loving husband. Handsome, strong, masculine with intelligence and a sense of humor. She smiled at the nickname he had given her, Doc. She had little doubt he'd love to have kids of his own in addition to Daisy and Tom, and those two would adore having younger siblings. In her mind, Ruby envisioned a full and satisfied life here in the West, even as Delta had found one. Gazing around at the beautiful landscape, Ruby still wondered if it was for her. Turning back, growing colder, she increased her pace, her breath frosting on the air before the wind blew it away. Do I really belong here? She asked herself. I just don't know. Like a black pall hanging over her, Ruby remembered the will, and how much the people she now cared about would suffer if she turned her back on them and returned to Boston with the children as she planned. Are they enough to change my life for? She asked the blue sky above. Can my caring for Ezra grow into love if I married him? Returning to the ranch, Ruby found Thelma making her slow way to the other house while Fred, Tom and Daisy, garbed in warm coats, headed for the barn to begin afternoon chores. Hurrying to catch up to them, Ruby assisted in feeding and watering the stock. Fred had removed the hide from the buck Ezra shot, and had cut up the meat, some of which was to be their supper tonight. The rest went into the smokehouse. Fred spent some time whistling under his breath as he tanned the hide, which he had said he planned to utilize as a rug. Despite the cold, Ruby watched for a time, fascinated. And the thing will be supple and soft? She asked. Yup. Even to use it as a blanket if necessary. Indians have been tanning hides this way for a long time, Daisy said as she threw corn to the chickens. And they don't even live in houses, Tom added. They live in tents. Ruby tried to imagine living in a tent made of leather, and sleeping under deer, elk, bear, or wolf skins, and could not. Give me a nice soft bed with quilts anytime, she said with a grin. Me, too, Daisy added. Dusk fell as the four of them left the barn and returned to the house, finding Thelma in the kitchen preparing the venison stew. To Ruby's surprise, Ezra had hobbled into the kitchen with the help of a long, heavy stick, and sat at the kitchen table. You shouldn't be up, she said, removing her wool cloak. He shrugged, not looking at her. I can't stand lying around. Thelma clicked her tongue as she cut up potatoes, onions, and carrots onto the big pot of simmering meat. You can't tell him anything, Ruby. Urging Thelma to sit at the table, Ruby and Daisy took the chore of making dinner from her while Tom set out the dishes and utensils. Ruby felt Ezra's eyes on her back as she worked, but any time she turned around, his eyes had flicked elsewhere. Knowing she deserved his condemnation for running away when he had exposed his heart to her, Ruby half listened to him speak to Fred about the ranch and its prospects while his leg healed. We're lucky you didn't break it during calving or branding season, Fred commented. There's not near so much to do in the middle of winter. I'm still leaving more for you to do than I should, Ezra told him. These things happen, boy. What about the Christmas dance? Daisy asked, and Ruby glanced at her to find her staring at Ezra. You can't go now, can you? It's tomorrow night. Ezra shook his head. I'm sorry, Daisy, I can't. Tears welled up in the little girl's eyes. Ruby lightly caressed her cheek with her fingers. We can find another way for you to see your friend, she said kindly. And Christmas is next week. Why don't we decorate the Christmas tree tomorrow night? Tom suggested. I think that's a wonderful idea, Thelma commented. Tom, maybe you and Grandpa can cut one down tomorrow. The venison stew tasted wonderful, but the stark neutrality on Ezra's countenance and Daisy's clear disappointment about the dance put a damper on Ruby's hunger. Her own guilt at destroying this tight family in the next few days didn't help either, and she suspected that was also on Thelma's mind. Do I stay here so that I can keep this family together, as well as the ranch, or pursue my own future back home? Chapter 11. Keeping his anger well hidden from the family and Ruby, Ezra contemplated the ramifications of disregarding the will Stephen and Delta left behind. Only that drat lawyer knows about it. Will he raise a stink if I send Ruby home to Boston and keep the ranch? Will he even notice? Ezra considered taking the will to the court and contesting it, wondering if the judge would recognize the need to keep the children with their blood kin over an orphanage. Ruby will never consent to marry me. I was a fool to open my mouth. She's too hoity-toity to marry a working man like me. Despite his words to himself, his heart ached with a longing that only Ruby could fulfill. Since her arrival, he had witnessed firsthand her love and warmth for the kids. In many ways, he understood Stephen's and Delta's reasoning behind the will, as he and Ruby together would make excellent parents for Daisy and Tom. Except, she would not marry him. With supper over, Ezra limped slowly to the sitting room with Fred, and collapsed into an armchair. "I can see you're angry, son," Fred commented. "Even though you're trying to hide it." Ezra glanced toward the kitchen and heard the noise of dishes being washed and conversation made. "I did what Stephen and Delta wanted, Pa," he said slowly, his voice soft. "I fell in love with her." "Let me guess," Fred went on, his eyes on the fire. "She don't feel the same." "Nope. Seems like nothing has gone right since your brother died, son." Fred drew a deep breath. "If she goes, so does everything I worked so hard for. And my grandkids. That don't seem right." "It's not right." His pain swamping him, Ezra refused to let it add to his dull anger, for if he did, he'd soon begin to yell, and then he'd say things he could not take back. "But there's nothing we can do. She's bound to leave soon after Christmas. She's got no reason to stay." "Nope," Fred replied. "She don't. You're a good boy, Ezra, and would make any woman proud to have as a husband. But you can't force someone to love you. Or marry you." Ezra slammed his fist on the arm of his chair, hurting his hand and wrist. "If Stephen had just trusted me," he growled. "He trusted you with his kids," Fred told him, looking at him, "and this ranch. He just didn't believe you'd work to find a mother to his children. That was his desire behind the will. That they have a mother. And so he and Delta played their hand and it failed," Ezra said bitterly. "She won't marry me even if I'm willing." "There's still time, boy," Fred answered. "Christmas is the season of miracles. It'll take a mighty big one for her to marry me, Pa." The next day, Daisy seemed to recover from her horrible disappointment in not going to the dance that evening. Fred, Tom, and she went out to cut a Christmas tree down. She skipped down the porch steps and ran with Tom across the yard toward the forest. "Hey, you youngsters, stay close," Fred hollered at them. "That ain't no playground over yonder." Standing on one leg and leaning on his stick, Ezra watched them vanish, Fred carrying his axe over his shoulder. The day promised warmer sunshine and clear skies, yet wasn't quite warm enough to sit on the porch. He closed the door and hobbled his way to the sofa to sit down. In the kitchen, Ruby and Thelma baked cookies and pies, the odors making him ponder the notion of hopping his way in there to steal a warm cookie or three. But the pain that moving around entailed discouraged him, and he settled his injured foot on the folded blanket piled atop the footstool for just that purpose. To distract himself from the pain, Ezra opened a book to read. As it happened, it was Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and he read it avidly, forgetting his rage, his grief, and his problems for a few hours. Deeply engrossed in it, he was hardly aware when Ruby sat down beside him. He jumped when she spoke. "Huh?" She smiled. "What are you reading?" "Oh. A Christmas Carol." "I adore that book," she told him, leaning toward him to perhaps read over his shoulder. "I always thought it was the perfect Christmas story, one that truly explains what the season is all about." Ezra contemplated her words for a moment, then nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose in many ways it is. A story of compassion, forgiveness, and miracles." She was so close to him. Gazing into her eyes made him feel lost in those two pools of purple blue, her slightly parted lips ripe and ready to be kissed. But she didn't like him that way. Ezra cleared his throat and turned his face from hers. Ruby pulled back as well, and from the corner of his eye he thought he saw a flicker of disappointment cross her features. "I imagine it was hard for you to lose Delta," he commented, scrambling for a conversation topic. "Yes, it was," she answered, staring into the fire. "I thought the world of her. She was sister, best friend, confidant all rolled into one. How about you? Losing Stephen must have been very difficult on you as well." Ezra shrugged, aiming for nonchalance. "I reckon so. Pa gave the land to him, as he was older, more responsible. He was a good brother." "Did you get along?" "For the most part." Ezra tried to smile. He was always lecturing me on taking my responsibilities more seriously. Used to be, I'd rather run my horse in a race than go to work. I like to think I've reached a point in my life where I'm ready to take on more. In glancing at her, thinking he'd find an expression of disbelief on her face, or hear her scoff, he found her watching him thoughtfully. What? Nothing. Ruby leaned against the back of the sofa and rested her cheek on her fist. I simply don't see how Stephen could ever have found fault with you. Well, I'm hardly perfect. No one is. But people seldom are ready to admit they have faults. The temptation proved too great. Inclining his shoulders toward her, Ezra cupped his hand behind her head and kissed her. He half expected her outrage, but instead her lips parted, and she kissed him back. Encouraged, he angled his face to better kiss her, and still she didn't retreat. At last, he drew back and gazed into her eyes. What he saw there encouraged him, for her countenance appeared warm, kind, and her eyes almost glowed. You, are not going to slap me? He asked. Are you? For answer, Ruby took his face in hers and kissed him deeply, and this time he felt her reined in emotions, her rising love, and the brief thought crossed his mind that this was indeed a miracle. Drawing away, she smiled. Are you going to slap me? No, ma'am. Where they might have gone from there was an unanswered question, for the front door burst open and Daisy raced in. We have the best tree ever, she gushed, bouncing up and down in the only way a little girl could. Laboring under the weight of the tree, Fred and Tom slowly pulled it through the doorway. Ruby jumped up to help, and the three of them got it into the house fully, a ponderosa pine that Ezra suspected was too big to stand upright. Unable to assist in any way except to offer advice, he watched as the four of them carefully stood it up in the corner. Its tip brushed the ceiling. Daisy, he said, admiring it, I agree. It's the best Christmas tree ever. I'll fetch the frame, Thelma said from the kitchen doorway. She walked slowly to the back of the house as Ruby praised their efforts for bringing in the prettiest tree, and Daisy and Tom wore bright grins on their pink faces. Ezra caught Fred eyeing him from behind the tree's branches, and he almost blushed, wondering if his pa knew he had been kissing Ruby. The tree firmly nailed into its frame, it stood tall and proud in the corner of the sitting room, ready for decorations. It's almost time for supper, Thelma stated. Get your chores done. Quickly now. Derry and Tom dashed out behind Fred while Ruby put on her coat. Her eyes, filled with something Ezra couldn't read, met his, then she, too, went out to feed the stock. He licked his lips, tasting her again, and wondered if her neutral feelings for him were changing. Ezra, Thelma called. Your hands ain't broke. Come in here and peel potatoes. Yes, ma'am. Chapter 12. I have never had so much fun decorating a Christmas tree, Ruby stated the next morning, the joy and elation of the previous evening still with her the following morning. Ezra grinned and tilted his head toward Daisy and Tom, who were busy admiring their handiwork and arguing over who got to hang the stockings that year. The basic ingredient are those two. Ruby nodded. Yes, I can see why. It was Sunday, and Ruby agreed to accompany the children and Thelma and Fred to church. Ezra, for obvious reasons, could not go, and commented how the quiet would do him good. Daisy, garbed in her Sunday best, dashed to Ruby. Aunt Ruby, can I wear your white gloves to church? Certainly. They are in my bureau drawer. At top speed, Daisy raced down the hallway to Ruby's room. Chuckling to herself, Ruby donned a flowered hat under Ezra's admiring gaze. You look beautiful, Miss Berkley. Why, thank you, Mr. Tobias. Why so formal all of a sudden? Thelma asked, hobbling slowly past. You were kissing just yesterday. Ezra laughed as Ruby felt her face heat in a fierce blush, unable to halt her own laughter. Oh, my, she muttered. Ma, have you ever heard the word privacy? Ezra asked. Thelma continued her slow way toward the door. You were in the open in an open house, dear. Since when do you expect privacy? Aunt Ruby. Ruby spun around at Daisy's crying voice even as Thelma paused to look over her shoulder, and Ezra half turned in his chair. Daisy stood near the kitchen, a crinkle of paper in her small hand, her once happy face now running with tears of anguish and anger. "There's 3 tickets, and 2 of them are for children. Are you taking us back to Boston, Aunt Ruby?" she asked. Her voice swelled with resentment and disbelief. "You are, aren't you?" Ruby felt the blood drain from her face. She knew Ezra's eyes were on her, knew he stood up with the aid of his stick. Tom ran past her to Daisy, his own eyes wide with panic. "Daisy, listen," Ruby began. "No," she screeched, throwing the tickets on the floor. "I won't go. I won't. I'm not leaving Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Ezra." Crying, Daisy fled to her room and slammed the door. Tom turned to face her, and Ruby recognized the terrible mistake she had made when she saw the expression of betrayal on his small face. Not anger, not fear, betrayal. With a calmness that scared her more than Daisy's anger and tears, Tom turned and walked slowly to his own room and closed the door. "Now, I reckon I know what your motive for coming here was." Her heart beating frantically, like the wings of a bird trapped in a cage, Ruby turned to face Ezra. His expression held nothing at all. Empty hazel eyes met her own, no warm smile welcomed her. Sweat broke out on her neck and brow. Thelma walked back to the sitting room and took an armchair just as Fred came in. "The wagon's ready," he said. "No one is going to church after all," Thelma stated calmly. "Fred, come in and sit. It's time for a talk." At Thelma's gesture, Ruby walked on numb feet to another chair while Ezra clumsily sat down. Gazing down at her hands in her lap, Thelma knew she would have to speak, to explain. She hoped Ezra would understand. Not Thelma or Fred. Ezra. "Yes," she began, feeling wretched and filled with self-loathing. "I did come here with the intention of taking them back with me. Before you judge me or grow angry or begin to yell at me, please let me speak." Looking up, she found 3 sets of eyes on her, and she swallowed. Her mouth dry, she went on. "I bought the tickets while still wondering what the best course of action was for everyone. I did indeed believe the children would be better off with me in Boston, and trust me when I say I've been torn with guilt." "Guilt?" Ezra snorted, his eyes hot. "Hush," Thelma snapped at him. "Yes, guilt." Ruby's own anger flared. "I knew that the will put all of us in a bad position, you of all people know that, Ezra. I hated the idea that you would lose everything you and Fred worked for. And everything landed on my shoulders. You were willing to marry me, Ezra, but it's my life and future at stake, too. I had to know if I could live here, marry you, maybe even love you." She watched as Ezra flushed, and stared at the floor. "I didn't know if I bought those tickets for the sake of Daisy and Tom, or for myself. Was I being selfish to want to take them home to Boston? To give them all the advantages I had? A good education? Good marriages when they came of age? Or do I sacrifice myself so Thelma and Ezra could keep their home, and you, Ezra, keep your ranch?" "No one had much choice in anything when Stephen and Delta died, leaving that will," Fred commented quietly. "It wasn't fair to either of you, but there you have it. Life ain't fair, and they did what they thought was right. Ruby, you were right to think to take them, as you were putting them kids first. Ezra, you were right to think badly of her, but you should reconsider." "I already have." Ruby stared at Ezra, who lifted his head to gaze at her. "If you feel that the best thing for Daisy and Tom is to take them," he sighed. "Lord, I don't want them to go. You know that. But I don't want to be selfish either. Maybe city life would be better for them. His voice broke. If it's best for them, I'll give them up. And if I lose the ranch, I lose the ranch. I'll take care of Ma and Pa for the rest of their days." She gaped, feeling the weight of the world land solidly on her shoulders. I don't know anymore." Ezra's eyes were warm on hers. "Is marrying me all that difficult? I thought you were starting to get used to the notion." Ruby floundered, her mouth opening and closing, trying to find the right words that didn't make her seem like a fool. "Well, I guess." Daisy charged into the sitting room, gasping, tears still running down her face. "Tom is gone," she cried. "His window is open, and he's gone. He's run off." Ezra cursed and used his stick to get to his left foot. "I have to go find him. He can't have gone far." "Don't be ridiculous," Ruby snapped. "I'll go find him. This is all my fault." "Daisy, does he have a particular place he goes when he's upset?" She shook her head. "I don't think so." "I'll go, too," Fred said. "He can't have gone far." Grabbing her wool cloak, Ruby flung it around her shoulders. "Let me go. I'll bring him back." "How do you know where he's gone?" Ezra yelled as she opened the door. Ruby glanced back. A mother's instinct. The air was brisk and cold as she rushed around the house to Tom's window. Gray clouds loomed overhead. Praying snow would hold off until she found him, Ruby looked at the ground for any small boy tracks. The ground was hard, however, and no trace of where he went showed there. Gazing in a direct line from his window, Ruby found the tree line not far away. She knew Fred would be looking also, despite her assurances to find him herself. She was also quite sure that Daisy would have gone with him. Hurrying into the forest, she called Tom's name as she ducked under tree branches, pine needles snagging in her hair. Growing impatient, she pulled her hair down to fall across her shoulders, making the going a little easier. "Tom," she yelled. "Thomas." The ground sloped steadily upward, and Ruby uneasily thought of wolves, or the huge cats, mountain lions. Small creatures scuttled away from her shoes as she hustled on, searching for any hint of color among the natural colors of the forest. Calming her emotions, she tried to listen to her heart, hoping she was right when she said she'd let her instincts guide her. "Turn right." Following the voice in her gut, Ruby hoped she could find her way back to the house once, and if she found Tom. Stumbling over half-hidden rocks under the dirty snow and dead pine needles, she rushed on, still calling Tom's name. The hill continued to climb, and Ruby quickly panted, breathing hard from the exertion. A stroll down the avenue in Boston never prepared me for this. Struggling on for nearly an hour, Ruby wondered if the small voice had been right. There was no sign of Tom in all this dense forest of pine and aspen trees, snow and rocks. How could she find him in all this wilderness? "Tom." What was that? Tilting her head as though that would help her to hear better, Ruby listened. It sounded like someone sobbing. "Thomas." She heard it again. It came from straight ahead of her. Dashing on, holding her skirts up to run faster, her breath fogging the crisp air, Ruby sought with eyes and ears for any trace of the boy. At first, she saw and heard nothing, but when she stopped, she distinctly heard the sound of a boy crying. Following it, Ruby gasped in relief, finding Tom lying under the shelter of a large boulder, weeping his heart out. "Tom, honey." Sitting beside him, Ruby gathered him into her arms, letting him cry against her shoulder. Rocking him back and forth, Ruby simply held him, grateful to have his small, dirty and coatless body against hers. She made no accusations, only offering up a small prayer of thanks. At last, Tom lifted his wet face toward hers. "I don't want to go to Boston," he whispered. "I suspected by your running away that you had serious objections," Ruby told him, wiping his face with her fingers. "That wasn't the way I wanted to tell you about it." "Please, Aunt Ruby," he begged, shivering with cold, "won't you stay and marry Uncle Ezra?" Needing to pace, but unable to, Ezra's fears and worries grew without an outlet. It had been forever since Ruby chased after Tom, and the snow had begun to fall. Rather than pace, he drummed his fingers on the arm of the chair and wondered how he might have his father saddle a horse for him so he could ride out after them. His mother had heated leftover soup for lunch, but he barely tasted his. Fred had returned with Daisy, and he paced while Daisy cried on and off, wailing how she couldn't go to Boston and leave everyone she loved behind. "Hush, Daisy," Thelma finally ordered. "Nothing has been decided yet." "But, Grandma, she has tickets." "I said to hush," child." The light outside faded as the storm grew in intensity, and Fred swore under his breath. "I need to get back out there," he said. Just when Ezra was about to ask his father to saddle a horse for him, the door swung open. 2 figures, one tall and one small, coated in white, entered. Daisy gave a sharp cry and ran toward them as Fred swung Tom up into one arm, then lay the other over Ruby's shoulder to plant a kiss to her cheek. "He's awful cold," Ruby said, her teeth chattering. "I wrapped him up as best I could." "Sit down," Fred ordered her. Daisy, fetched the soup from the stove. Ezra hobbled over and helped Ruby remove her wet cloak as Fred sat Tom down by the fire. The boy's cheeks were blue, and he shivered uncontrollably. Grabbing the blanket that propped his foot up, Ezra tossed it to Fred, who wrapped Tom up in it. He then urged Ruby into the chair closest to the fire, then awkwardly sat on a stool at her feet. Pulling off her shoes, he rubbed her icy feet briskly, then her hands, then her feet again. Ruby gazed down at him, shivering nearly as much as Tom. Thelma and Daisy arrived with hot soup in cups. "Drink it down," Ezra ordered her quietly, gesturing for Daisy to throw another blanket over Ruby's shoulders. Her purple-blue eyes on his, Ruby smiled. "I've done a lot of soul-searching in the last while," she said, her teeth still chattering. "Save it," Ezra told her, glancing at Tom, who drank the hot liquid from his cup, his small hands shaking. "Drink your soup, it'll warm you." "You are awful bossy, you know," she commented, but nonetheless, she obeyed him. "Yeah, well, I tend to do that when folks I love run out into the winter storms." "Folks I love," she repeated softly. Ezra gazed up at her, her cold feet still in his hands. "Yeah. But that don't matter. I expect you'll be wanting to take the youngsters back home with you anyway." At Daisy and Tom's stricken expressions, Ezra winced, wishing he hadn't started that line of conversation in their hearing. "You know what I mean," he muttered, feeling his heart ache to think of losing both them and Ruby. He knew he had fallen deeply in love with Ruby and had realized it even more surely when she dashed out the door to find Tom. He dared not look up, for he knew he'd see on her face what was in her heart: she didn't love him and never would. She'd never marry him, for she could never love a simple working man like him. Feeling his heart aching, he finally glanced up at her silence. "You finished wallowing in your assumptions now?" she asked, her right brow raised. "So now," she mocked him. "Never mind," he muttered, wondering how in the world he was supposed to get up off the floor now. Getting his stick under him, he used his arms to lift himself high enough up to get his good left leg under him, until her bare foot gently pushed him back down. "I'm waiting," she said, her tone lofty. "For what?" he snapped. "It's hardly romantic under the circumstances," Ruby declared, examining her fingernails. "But girls do appreciate marriage proposals, cowboy. Even out here in these dreadful woods." Ezra gaped. Catching the glint of mischief in her eyes, he started to grin. "Oh, it's like that, is it?" "Yes." Her smile widened. "It's like that. Give me your hand." Still the bossy one. But Ruby gave him her hand, and Ezra kissed it. Gazing up into her lovely eyes, Ezra tried to make his voice sultry and oozing with romance. Under the avid eyes of Thelma, Fred, Daisy, and Tom, he said, "Doc, will you marry me?" Ruby's smile wobbled, and a tear or two tracked down her cheeks. "A Christmas marriage proposal," she gushed, leaning down to kiss him. "Yes, Ezra, you fool," she murmured against his lips, "I will marry you." Ezra kissed her, trying not to laugh at the silly way she managed to get a marriage proposal out of him. "You had me going, Doc," he murmured, their foreheads touching as he stared into her eyes. "I always enjoy keeping a man off balance," she replied with a grin before kissing him again. "That won't be difficult," he replied, "since I have only one working leg." Ruby burst into laughter, her arms around his neck. "You are something, Ezra. Don't I know it?" Ruby straightened up in her chair as Ezra gazed around at his family. Thelma and Daisy were both wiping their eyes with their fingers, while Tom grinned openly, and Fred simply stared. Well, Ezra groused, hiding his own grin, you all going to just stand there, or is someone going to help me up? The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.